Nestled between rolling hills and thick emerald canopies lay the village of Malua, a place where life was simple and joys were shared in abundance. Farmers tilled the fertile soil, carpenters shaped wood with care, and fishers sang as they cast their nets into the crystal-clear streams. The people of Malua lived by the rhythms of nature, celebrating the rains, fearing the droughts, and respecting the mysterious forest that loomed at the village's edge. The forest was not an ordinary one. Stories told of shadows that moved on their own, voices that whispered warnings, and strange lights that flickered between the trees. Children were taught from a young age to never wander too far, and even adults kept their distance, speaking in hushed tones about those who had ventured in and never returned. Amara, however, was no ordinary villager. Amara was known throughout Malua for her beauty. Her dark, lustrous hair cascaded like a waterfall over her shoulders, and her eyes sparkled like the stars above the hills. But it wasn't just her appearance that set her apart. It was her ambitions. While others were content with their modest lives, Amara dreamed of something grander, something that extended far beyond the humble confines of Malua. Her aspirations often caused tension within her family. Her father, Bayo, was a carpenter who found pride in the sturdy furniture he built with his own hands. Her mother, Nia, was a healer whose gentle touch and herbal remedies brought solace to those in need. Together, they had raised Amara to value hard work, kindness, and community, but these lessons seemed to fall on deaf ears. "You'll never find happiness chasing after gold and glitter," her mother often warned, stirring a pot of fragrant soup over the fire. "True wealth is in the love of family and the blessings of health." "But what is life without dreams, mother?" Amara would counter, her voice lilting with defiance. "I don't want to spend my days in a hut, mending clothes or grinding millet. I'm meant for more." Her father would sigh and shake his head, the lines of worry deepening on his face. "Pride can lead to ruin, my child. Remember that the brightest stars often burn out the fastest." But Amara's mind was made up. She wasn't interested in the suitors who came knocking at their door, young farmers with calloused hands or shy fishermen who offered her carved trinkets. To her, they were all the same, simple men with simple dreams. She wanted a life of luxury, a life fit for a queen. The village of Malua buzzed with excitement as the harvest festival approached. It was the most anticipated event of the year, a time when the villagers came together to celebrate their hard work and share in the season's bounty. Musicians practiced lively tunes on their drums and flutes, children strung colorful garlands of flowers, and women prepared trays of roasted yams, honey cakes, and spiced fish. Amara, of course, was determined to outshine everyone. She spent days perfecting her dress, a vibrant ensemble of crimson and gold, and adorned herself with necklaces and bangles borrowed from her mother's modest collection. As she stood before the small mirror in their hut, she couldn't help but smile at her reflection. "Beautiful," she whispered to herself, turning slightly to admire the way the dress caught the light. "Tonight, everyone will see what I am capable of." Her mother, watching from the doorway, sighed softly. "Amara, you're already beautiful. You don't need all this to prove your worth." "It's not about proving anything, mother," Amara replied with a playful smile. "It's about showing the world that I'm ready for more." As evening fell, the village square came alive with laughter, music, and the glow of lanterns strung between trees. Amara made her entrance with the grace of a queen, her dress swirling around her like fire. Heads turned, and whispers rippled through the crowd. "She looks like a goddess," someone murmured. "Even the stars would envy her beauty," another added. Amara soaked in the admiration, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. But even as the villagers sang and danced around her, she felt a pang of dissatisfaction. The admiration of simple folk was fleeting. What she craved was the adoration of someone powerful, someone who could lift her out of this village and into the life she deserved. As the night deepened and the festival reached its peak, Amara stood alone near the edge of the square, gazing toward the shadowy outline of the forest. The music and laughter seemed distant, muffled by the pull of her own thoughts. Is this all there is? She wondered aloud. Dancing, feasting, and living the same life year after year? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden stillness that fell over the square. The laughter faded, the music ceased, and even the breeze seemed to hold its breath. Slowly, Amara turned and saw the figure of a man standing at the edge of the crowd. He was unlike anyone she had ever seen. Tall and striking, he wore robes that shimmered like moonlight and seemed to flow as if alive. His skin had an otherworldly glow, and his eyes, dark and piercing, locked onto hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. The villagers parted silently as he walked forward, his every step commanding attention. When he finally reached Amara, he bowed slightly, a smile playing on his lips. "You must be Amara," he said, his voice deep and smooth like the river after a storm. Amara blinked, taken aback. "I am. And you are?" "Call me Damba," he replied, his smile widening. "I've traveled far to find someone as extraordinary as you." Her heart raced, not with fear, but with exhilaration. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. "Extraordinary, you say?" she asked, a coy smile curving her lips. "Extraordinary," Damba repeated, his gaze unwavering, "and worthy of a life far greater than this." As he spoke, Amara's doubts and fears melted away, replaced by a heady sense of triumph. Finally, her dreams were within reach. Little did she know, those dreams were about to lead her into a nightmare. "You flatter me," she said, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "I speak only the truth," Damba replied, his gaze unwavering. "A woman of your beauty and grace deserves a life far greater than this." He gestured to the square, where the villagers stood frozen, still watching. Amara's cheeks flushed, not with embarrassment, but with pride. "And what kind of life would that be?" Damba's smile widened. "A life of luxury. A life where you are adorned with jewels, dressed in the finest silks, and surrounded by splendor. A life where your beauty is celebrated as it deserves to be." Her breath hitched. It was as if he had plucked the very dreams from her mind and spoken them aloud. The villagers, however, were less entranced. Nia, Amara's mother, pushed her way through the crowd and stood beside her daughter, her face pale but determined. "And what would a man like you want with our Amara?" she asked, her voice sharp. Damba turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Only to offer her the life she was born to live," he said smoothly. "She is destined for greatness, and I wish to help her achieve it." Nia's unease deepened. A man with good intentions does not appear uninvited, cloaked in mystery, she said. "Who are you truly, and where do you come from?" Damba's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "My past matters little," he said. "What matters is the future I can offer your daughter. A future she deserves." Amara, impatient with her mother's suspicion, interjected. "Mother, stop. Can't you see he's different? He's not like the others." "Exactly," Nia replied, her voice low. "He is not like the others, and that is why you should be wary." The tension was palpable, the villagers watching the exchange with bated breath. But Amara had already made up her mind. This was her chance, her escape from the ordinary, her path to the extraordinary. "When would you like to leave?" she asked, her voice ringing clear in the still air. Nia gasped. "Amara, no. You don't know him." Damba's smile returned, triumphant. "Tomorrow, at first light," he said, "I will take you to my home, where your new life awaits." The villagers murmured among themselves, their unease growing. But Amara paid them no mind. She had made her choice, and she would not let fear or suspicion deter her. As the festival resumed hesitantly behind them, Damba leaned closer, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. "You've made the right decision, Amara. Together, we will create a life unlike anything you've ever imagined." Amara smiled, her heart pounding with excitement. She had no idea that her decision would lead her into the darkest depths of the forest, and to a truth more terrifying than any nightmare. The sun had barely begun its ascent when Amara awoke, her heart racing with anticipation. She dressed quickly, choosing her finest attire, a flowing blue gown her mother had sewn by hand. Though her mother and father had refused to speak to her after her decision, she felt no guilt. This was her moment, and she wouldn't let their fear hold her back. As she stepped outside, the village lay cloaked in a soft morning mist. The air was cool, and the only sounds were the chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves. Damba was already waiting at the edge of the square, his form illuminated by the first rays of sunlight. "You're ready," he said, his voice as smooth as ever. Amara nodded, her determination unshaken. Damba offered her his hand, and she took it without hesitation. The villagers watched from their doorways, their expressions a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Her mother stood among them, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Amara," Nia called out, her voice trembling. "Please don't do this." Amara paused, glancing back at her mother. For a brief moment, doubt flickered in her chest. But then she turned to Damba, whose steady gaze promised everything she had ever wanted. "I'll be fine, Mother," she said, forcing a smile. "You'll see." With that, she allowed Damba to lead her away, their footsteps fading into the misty forest. The forest was a realm entirely its own, a place where time seemed to stand still. The trees were ancient, their gnarled roots weaving intricate patterns across the forest floor. Sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, creating dappled patterns of light and shadow. The air was thick with the scent of earth and moss, and the occasional call of a bird echoed through the stillness. Amara felt a shiver of unease, but Damba's presence beside her was reassuring. He moved with a confidence that suggested he knew this place well, his steps purposeful and unhesitating. As they ventured deeper, Amara tried to make conversation to distract herself from the eerie quiet. "Where exactly is your home?" she asked. "Far from here," Damba replied cryptically. "Beyond the boundaries of what you know." Amara frowned, but didn't press further. His vagueness only added to his allure, she decided. The hours stretched on, and the forest grew denser. The sunlight that had once pierced through the canopy was now a faint glow, and the air became cooler, heavier. Amara began to notice subtle changes in the surroundings. The trees seemed to lean closer, their twisted branches forming intricate arches above the path. Strange plants with glowing flowers lined the trail, their light casting an ethereal glow. "Are we close?" she asked, her voice tinged with unease. "Patience," Damba said, his tone calm. "The journey is part of the transformation." Amara didn't fully understand what he meant, but she didn't question him. As dusk approached, they reached a clearing unlike anything Amara had ever seen. The ground was covered in soft, silvery moss that shimmered in the fading light. In the center stood a massive tree, its trunk so wide that it would have taken 10 people to encircle it. Its branches stretched high into the sky, disappearing into the darkness above. "This is where we'll rest for the night," Damba said, gesturing to the base of the tree. Amara hesitated. There was something about the tree that felt alive. Its bark seemed to pulse faintly, and she thought she heard a low hum emanating from it. "Here?" she asked, her voice uncertain. "It's safe," Damba assured her, "and the journey ahead will require your strength." Reluctantly, Amara sat down, leaning against the massive trunk. The silvery moss was surprisingly soft, and despite her unease, she felt herself relaxing. Damba sat a few feet away, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "What lies ahead?" she asked, her curiosity overriding her nervousness. "Something extraordinary," Damba said, his voice almost a whisper. "A place where your dreams will come to life." Amara's heart fluttered at his words. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to imagine the life that awaited her, a life of luxury and splendor, far removed from the simplicity of Malua. Amara awoke in the middle of the night to an unsettling silence. The forest, which had been filled with the sounds of rustling leaves and distant animals, was now eerily quiet. She sat up, her eyes adjusting to the darkness. Damba was nowhere to be seen. "Damba," she called out, her voice trembling slightly. There was no response. The tree behind her seemed to pulse more intensely now, its hum louder, almost like a heartbeat. Amara's unease grew as she stood, her bare feet sinking into the soft moss. "Damba," she called again, louder this time. A rustling sound came from the shadows, and she turned sharply. A figure emerged from the darkness, but it wasn't Damba. It was a creature she couldn't comprehend, its form shifting and flickering as if it were made of shadows. Its eyes glowed a haunting blue, and it moved toward her with an unnatural grace. Amara stumbled back, her breath caught in her throat. Just as the creature reached her, a voice rang out. "Enough!" The creature froze, then dissolved into the shadows. Damba stepped into the clearing, his expression unreadable. "What was that?" Amara demanded, her voice shaking. "Nothing to fear," Damba said calmly. "The forest tests all who pass through it. You've shown courage." Amara's anger flared. "Courage? I wasn't warned about whatever that was." Damba placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch surprisingly warm. "Trust me, Amara. This journey will lead you to greatness. Do not let fear cloud your path." Despite her frustration, his words soothed her. She nodded reluctantly and sat back down. As the night wore on, sleep eluded her. The hum of the tree seemed louder than ever, and the shadows around the clearing felt alive. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Little did she know, the real test was yet to come. When Amara awoke, she immediately sensed that something was wrong. The soft moss beneath her was gone, replaced by cold, rough stone. The faint hum of the ancient tree was silent, and instead, she heard the slow drip of water echoing in a cavernous space. Her eyes fluttered open, and she gasped. She was no longer in the clearing. Instead, she was inside a dimly lit chamber with walls of jagged rock that stretched high above her. The air was damp, carrying the metallic tang of something she couldn't quite place. A faint glow emanated from clusters of strange fungi clinging to the walls, casting eerie shadows. Amara scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding. "Damba," she called out, her voice echoing in the cavern. There was no response. The last thing she remembered was the unease of the night and the rhythmic pulsing of the tree. Now, she was trapped in a place she didn't recognize, with no sign of Damba or the path they had been following. She turned in a slow circle, her pulse quickening as she took in her surroundings. The chamber was vast, with narrow tunnels branching off in different directions. She could hear faint sounds, whispers, perhaps, or the distant movement of something large. "Hello," she called out again, her voice trembling. This time, a response came, a low, guttural growl that sent chills down her spine. Amara backed away from the tunnel entrance, her breath hitching. She had no idea where she was or how she had gotten here. But one thing was clear, she was not alone. Hours passed, or so it seemed, as Amara wandered through the labyrinth of tunnels. The light from the glowing fungi provided just enough visibility to keep her from stumbling, but it also cast long, shifting shadows that made her feel like she was being followed. Her stomach growled with hunger, and her throat was parched. She found a small pool of water in one of the caverns, its surface shimmering faintly, and drank cautiously. The water was cool, but carried an earthy taste that made her grimace. "Damba," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Where are you?" She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to cry. She had chosen this path, and she would find a way through it. Eventually, she came upon a larger chamber, and her breath caught in her throat. In the center of the room was a massive stone altar, its surface carved with intricate patterns that glowed faintly in the dim light. Chains dangled from the altar, their ends stained with a dark, rusty substance that made Amara's stomach churn. She stepped closer, drawn by a mix of curiosity and dread. The carvings on the altar depicted scenes she couldn't fully comprehend. Twisted figures, some human, others monstrous, all locked in a macabre dance of suffering and despair. "What is this place?" she murmured, her voice barely audible. As if in response, a voice echoed through the chamber. "It is the price of ambition." Amara spun around, her eyes wide. Damba stood at the entrance to the chamber, his robes as immaculate as ever. But there was something different about him now, something colder, more menacing. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice shaking. Damba stepped closer, his movements deliberate. "This is where the forest reveals its truth," he said. "You sought a life of splendor, of greatness. But every dream comes with a cost." Amara took a step back, her mind racing. "You promised me a better life," she said, her voice rising. "You said I was destined for more." "And you are," Damba replied. "But to claim that destiny, you must prove your worth. You must surrender who you are to become who you were meant to be." His words sent a chill down her spine. "What are you talking about?" she asked. Damba gestured to the altar. "The forest does not grant gifts freely. It demands sacrifices. You must leave behind your old self, your doubts, your fears, your humanity. Only then can you rise to the life you desire." Amara shook her head, her stomach twisting with dread. "This isn't what I wanted. This isn't what you promised." Damba's expression remained calm, almost pitying. "The truth is rarely what we expect, Amara, but it is necessary." As Damba spoke, the chamber began to change. The shadows on the walls shifted, growing darker and more oppressive. The glowing fungi dimmed, and the air grew colder. Amara felt the walls closing in around her, the weight of the cavern pressing down on her chest. She turned and ran, fleeing back into the tunnels, her footsteps echoing wildly. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to get away. But no matter how far she ran, the whispers followed her. Low, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to come from the walls themselves. She felt as though the forest were alive, watching her, judging her. Her strength began to wane, her legs trembling with exhaustion. She stumbled into another chamber, smaller this time, and collapsed against the wall, her chest heaving. "Please," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Let me go." For a moment, the whispers stopped, and the cavern was silent. Then a voice echoed in her mind, cold, detached, and inhuman. "Prove your worth, or remain lost forever." Amara buried her face in her hands, despair washing over her. She had dreamed of a life beyond the village, but she had never imagined this, a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. The hours, or perhaps days, blurred together as Amara wandered the tunnels, her hope dwindling with each step. She was haunted by the sound of her own breathing, the oppressive silence of the cavern, and the whispers that seemed to mock her at every turn. She thought of her mother, of the warnings she had ignored. She thought of the villagers, of the life she had so eagerly left behind. And for the first time, she wondered if her dreams had been worth the price she was now paying. Amara leaned against the cold stone wall of the cavern, her breath shallow and uneven. She could feel her strength ebbing away, the weight of the endless tunnels pressing down on her. The whispers in the air had grown louder, their words still unintelligible but dripping with menace. She closed her eyes, trying to summon the courage to keep going, when a faint sound caught her attention, a distant, rhythmic thudding like footsteps. Her eyes flew open, and she strained her ears. The sound was growing louder, coming closer. Her heart raced as fear and a flicker of hope surged within her. It could be Damba, or it could be something worse. She pushed herself to her feet, her muscles protesting with every movement, and slipped into the shadows. Peering around a jagged rock, she saw a figure approaching. At first, she thought it was Damba, but as the figure drew closer, she realized it was someone else entirely, a young man, his clothes tattered, his face pale and streaked with dirt. "Help!" she called, stepping out from her hiding spot. The man froze, his eyes wide with terror as he took her in. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice hoarse and wary. "My name is Amara," she said quickly, keeping her distance to avoid scaring him further. "I'm trying to get out of here. Do you know the way?" The man shook his head, his expression darkening. "There is no way out," he said. "Not unless you do what it wants." "What it wants?" Amara repeated, dread pooling in her stomach. He pointed toward the direction he'd come from, his hand trembling. "The forest. The altar. It demands a sacrifice. Without it, you'll never leave." Amara's mind raced as she tried to process his words. She refused to believe there was no escape, but the hopelessness in his eyes was unmistakable. "How long have you been here?" she asked softly. The man hesitated, his face clouded with confusion. "I don't know. Days? Months? Time doesn't feel the same here." Amara stepped closer, determination hardening her voice. "Then we'll find another way. Together." He stared at her, a flicker of something like hope crossing his face. After a long pause, he nodded. The two moved cautiously through the tunnels, their footsteps echoing faintly. Amara learned the man's name was Jorin, and he, too, had been lured into the forest by promises of a better life. Unlike her, he had no guide. One moment he'd been walking in a sunlit grove. The next, he was here, trapped in the labyrinthine caves. "Have you seen Damba?" Amara asked as they navigated a narrow passage. Jorin's face darkened at the mention of the name. "I've heard of him," he said. "He's one of the forest's agents. They lure people here, offering them everything they've ever wanted." And then he trailed off, his voice heavy with bitterness. Amara felt her stomach twist. She had trusted Damba, allowed herself to believe his promises. Had he truly betrayed her? "What happens to those who stay?" she asked hesitantly. Jorin's gaze dropped to the ground. "I've seen them," he said. "People who gave in. They change, become part of the forest. Shadows, creatures, things that haunt these halls." Amara shivered, her resolve hardening. She would not become one of those things. After what felt like hours of searching, they stumbled upon a larger cavern. At its center stood a crumbling staircase carved into the stone, spiraling upward into the darkness. "It might lead out," Jorin said, his voice tinged with desperation. Amara nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. She glanced around, her eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. "Let's go," she said, taking the first step. The staircase was narrow and uneven, forcing them to move slowly. The air grew colder as they ascended, and the faint whispers that had plagued them in the tunnels became louder, more distinct. Amara could almost make out words now, though they still sounded fragmented and distorted. "Keep going," Jorin urged from behind her. But as they climbed higher, the whispers became screams. The walls of the cavern seemed to close in, the shadows twisting and writhing. Amara's heart pounded as she fought to stay focused, her hands gripping the rough stone railing. Suddenly, a deafening roar echoed through the cavern. The staircase trembled violently, and Amara stumbled, barely catching herself. She turned to Jorin, her voice frantic. "Run!" The two of them raced up the staircase, the roar growing louder with every step. The air was filled with a suffocating pressure, and Amara felt as though her lungs were being squeezed. She could hear something massive moving below them, its footsteps shaking the very foundation of the cavern. At last, they reached the top of the staircase, emerging into a smaller chamber. A single, narrow passageway stretched before them, its walls glowing faintly with a pale blue light. "This has to lead out," Jorin said, his voice filled with a mixture of hope and fear. Amara nodded, but as they moved toward the passage, the roaring ceased. The sudden silence was deafening, and both of them froze, their breaths shallow. Then, from the shadows behind them, a figure emerged. It was Damba, but he was no longer the man Amara had known. His form was twisted, his once handsome face distorted into something grotesque. His eyes glowed a sickly green, and his voice was a guttural rasp. "You cannot leave," he growled, blocking their path. Amara stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists. "You lied to me," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "I told you the truth," Damba replied. "Greatness requires sacrifice. You chose this path, and now you must see it through." "We're not staying," Jorin said, his voice firm despite the fear in his eyes. Damba laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the chamber. "You think you can escape? The forest does not let go so easily." Amara glanced at Jorin, then back at Damba. "We'll see about that," she said, her voice steady. With a sudden burst of courage, she grabbed a loose stone from the ground and hurled it at Damba. The moment of distraction was enough. She and Jorin bolted into the narrow passage, the walls glowing brighter as they ran. Behind them, Damba's roar echoed, and the ground trembled once more. The passage seemed to stretch endlessly, but they didn't stop, their desperation driving them forward. The blue light grew brighter, almost blinding, until finally they burst into a vast clearing, the night sky above them filled with stars. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Amara breathed deeply, the fresh air filling her lungs. But she knew the forest wasn't done with them yet. Amara and Jorin stumbled into the clearing, their breaths ragged and their bodies trembling with exhaustion. The stars above sparkled in a velvety night sky, and for a brief, fragile moment, Amara felt a flicker of hope. The cool air on her skin and the rustling of leaves in the gentle wind were a sharp contrast to the oppressive darkness of the tunnels. But the forest was far from finished with them. The ground beneath their feet began to quake, and an unnatural silence fell over the clearing. The comforting sounds of the forest, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves, vanished, replaced by a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from everywhere at once. Amara grabbed Jorin's arm. "We can't stop now. We have to keep moving." Before they could take another step, the trees at the edge of the clearing twisted and bent as though bowing to an unseen force. A shadow emerged from the darkness, and Amara's stomach turned to ice. Damba stood before them, but he was no longer the man she had met at the village. His figure was grotesque, his body stretching and contorting in ways that defied nature. His glowing green eyes pierced through the darkness, and his voice was a deep, resonant growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground. "You cannot escape the will of the forest," Damba intoned, his words carrying an otherworldly weight. "The debt must be paid." Jorin stepped forward, his voice shaking but resolute. "We didn't ask for this. You tricked us, both of us." Damba tilted his head, his twisted features forming something akin to a smirk. "You sought greatness. You desired more than the life you had. The forest merely answered your call." Amara clenched her fists, anger surging through her. "You promised a better life. You never said it would cost us everything." "The forest demands balance," Damba replied. "It grants power, but does not give freely. You must prove yourselves worthy." Amara's mind raced. She couldn't let this creature dictate her fate. She had fought too hard to accept defeat now. "What does the forest want?" she demanded. Damba's glowing eyes bore into hers. "Sacrifice. Only through surrender can you ascend. One of you must remain, bound to the forest, while the other walks free." Jorin's face paled, and Amara felt her chest tighten. The weight of Damba's words pressed down on her, threatening to crush her resolve. Amara looked at Jorin, who was staring at her with a mixture of fear and desperation. She couldn't bear the thought of leaving him behind, or of sacrificing herself to this monstrous place. There had to be another way. "No," she said firmly, stepping forward to face Damba. "I don't accept your terms." Damba's grotesque form loomed closer, his laughter reverberating through the clearing. "You have no choice. The forest has claimed you. Resistance is futile." Amara's mind raced as she searched for a way out. Her eyes darted around the clearing, landing on a small pool of water shimmering faintly at the far edge. The water seemed out of place, glowing with an ethereal light that was both beautiful and unsettling. "What is that?" she asked, gesturing toward the pool. Damba followed her gaze, his expression unreadable. "The heart of the forest," he said. "It binds all who enter, sustains its power, and enforces its will." A spark of determination flared within Amara. If the pool was the source of the forest's power, perhaps it could also be its weakness. Without warning, Amara broke into a sprint, racing toward the pool. "Amara, no!" Jorin shouted, but she didn't stop. Damba roared, the ground shaking violently as he surged after her. The trees around the clearing twisted and writhed, their branches reaching out like clawed hands to block her path. Amara ducked and weaved, her heart pounding as she dodged the grasping branches. The pool's glow grew brighter with each step, its light cutting through the oppressive darkness like a beacon. She reached the edge of the pool and hesitated for only a moment. The water was impossibly clear, and she could see strange, swirling patterns beneath its surface, as if the very essence of the forest was alive within it. Damba's roar grew deafening, and she felt the ground tremble beneath her feet. With a surge of determination, she plunged her hands into the water, ignoring the icy cold that burned her skin. The moment her hands touched the surface, a shock wave rippled through the clearing. The light from the pool flared, blindingly bright, and Amara felt a searing pain shoot through her body. She gritted her teeth, refusing to let go. She could feel the forest fighting back, its will pressing against hers like an overwhelming tide. "Let go!" Damba roared, his voice filled with rage and desperation. But Amara held on, her mind filled with thoughts of freedom, of her mother, of the life she had left behind, and of the future she still hoped to build. As the light from the pool intensified, Damba let out a final, bone-chilling scream. His twisted form began to disintegrate, dissolving into shadows that were drawn into the pool. The clearing trembled violently, and Amara felt as though the world itself was being torn apart. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos ceased. Amara collapsed to the ground, her body trembling with exhaustion. The pool's glow had faded, leaving only a faint shimmer on its surface. The forest was silent, its oppressive presence lifted. Jorin rushed to her side, his face pale but filled with relief. "You did it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Amara nodded weakly, her gaze fixed on the pool. She didn't know how she had managed to break the forest's hold, but she knew one thing for certain. She was free. As the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, Amara and Jorin stepped out of the clearing, leaving the nightmare of the forest behind them. They didn't look back. The forest lay silent as Amara and Jorin emerged from its grasp. The first golden rays of dawn illuminated the world, casting a warm, hopeful light over the landscape. The oppressive weight that had followed them since entering the forest was gone, replaced by a sense of fragile peace. Amara stumbled as they reached the edge of the forest, her body weak and trembling from the ordeal. Jorin caught her, steadying her with a firm grip. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern etched on his face. She nodded faintly, though every part of her ached. "I'll be fine. We're free now. That's all that matters." For a moment, they stood together, taking in the open expanse of the world beyond the forest. The field stretched endlessly before them, the air fresh and filled with the chirping of birds, a sound Amara had almost forgotten. As they walked, Amara felt the weight of her choices settle on her shoulders. The memories of the villagers, of Damba's betrayal, and of the lives consumed by the forest haunted her. She had survived, but the price had been steep. "What happens now?" Jorin asked after a long silence. Amara shook her head. "I don't know. I can't go back to the village. Not after everything that's happened." Jorin glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "You broke the forest's hold. That's something no one's ever done before. Maybe that means you can make things right." Amara frowned, uncertainty gnawing at her. "How can I? The people who were lost, the ones the forest claimed, I can't bring them back." Jorin stopped walking and turned to face her. "You can't undo the past, but you can honor it. You can make sure no one else falls into the forest trap. You can use what you've learned to help others." His words struck a chord in her. She thought of the stories she'd heard as a child, of travelers who vanished without a trace, and of the countless lives the forest had stolen over the years. Perhaps her survival wasn't just luck. Perhaps it was an opportunity to change things. Days later, they reached a bustling town far from the shadow of the forest. The streets were filled with merchants, travelers, and townsfolk, their laughter and chatter a stark contrast to the silence Amara had grown accustomed to. Jorin suggested they rest and regroup before deciding their next steps. Amara agreed, though her mind was already racing with ideas. At the town's inn, they shared their story with the innkeeper, a kind woman named Lila. She listened with wide eyes, her hands trembling as she clutched a steaming mug of tea. You escaped the cursed forest? Lila whispered, her voice filled with awe. Amara nodded. We did, but it wasn't easy. The forest, it feeds on desperation, on the dreams of those who seek more than they have. Lila leaned forward, her expression earnest. You should tell your story to others. Warn them. There are so many who've been lost to that place. Amara exchanged a glance with Jorin, who gave her an encouraging nod. I think you're right, Amara said. If we can help even one person avoid what we went through, it'll be worth it. Over the following months, Amara and Jorin dedicated themselves to their mission. They traveled from town to town, sharing their tale with anyone who would listen. Amara's voice carried the weight of her experiences, and her words struck a chord with many. They met others who had lost loved ones to the forest, and while Amara couldn't bring those people back, she offered comfort and hope. She taught villagers how to recognize the signs of the forest's influence, unexplained disappearances, strange whispers in the night, and how to resist its allure. In time, Amara became something of a legend herself. Stories of a young woman who escaped the cursed forest spread far and wide, inspiring others to be cautious and to value the lives they had. One day, as they traveled through a small village nestled in the hills, a group of children approached Amara. They listened intently as she recounted her journey, their eyes wide with wonder. Were you scared? One of them asked, a little boy clutching a wooden toy. Amara knelt down to his level, a gentle smile on her face. I was terrified, she admitted, but I learned that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you keep going even when you are. The boy nodded solemnly, his grip tightening on his toy. I want to be brave like you. Amara felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known she needed. As the years passed, the forest's power waned. Without the constant stream of victims drawn to its promises, it began to shrink, its boundaries retreating. The once mysterious woods became a cautionary tale, a place of legend rather than fear. Amara and Jorin continued their work, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. They were no longer the frightened souls who had stumbled out of the forest. They had become symbols of resilience and hope. One evening, as they sat by a campfire under a starlit sky, Jorin turned to Amara. Do you ever think about what happened in the forest? He asked. Amara gazed into the flames, her expression thoughtful. Sometimes, she said, it's a part of me now, and I don't think it will ever fully leave. But I've learned to live with it, and I've learned that even in the darkest places, there's a way forward. Jorin nodded, his gaze steady. You've changed so much since then. Amara smiled faintly. So have you. We survived something impossible, Jorin, and now we're making something good out of it. The fire crackled softly, and the two sat in companionable silence, the weight of their shared past balanced by the promise of a brighter future. Amara closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the fire and the cool night air wash over her. She knew the forest would always be a part of her story, but it no longer defined her. She was free, truly free, and she had found her purpose in the ashes of her trials. And for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace.